Sarah Martinez walked into the local martial arts gym on a quiet Tuesday evening. She had just moved to the small town of Cedar Falls after finishing her military service. The gym owner, Mr. Kim, had given her permission to use the facilities during off-peak hours. Sarah preferred training alone, away from curious eyes and endless questions about her background. The gym smelled of sweat and determination. Heavy bags hung from the ceiling like silent sentinels. Sarah changed into her plain black workout clothes and began her routine. She started with stretching, her movements fluid and precise. Every muscle fiber responded to commands honed through years of rigorous training that most people could never imagine. As Sarah moved through her warm-up, she noticed the gym's main door open. 3 men walked in, their voices echoing through the empty space. The leader was Marcus Thompson, a local black belt instructor who taught classes at the gym 3 times a week. Marcus was known throughout the town for his martial arts skills and his oversized ego to match. "Look what we have here," Marcus said, his voice dripping with amusement. His 2 friends, Jake and Dennis, flanked him on either side. All 3 men wore their martial arts uniforms, black belts tied around their waists like badges of honor. Sarah continued her stretching routine, pretending not to notice the newcomers. She had learned long ago that avoiding unnecessary confrontation was often the wisest path. But Marcus had different plans. "Hey there, sweetheart," Marcus called out, walking closer to where Sarah was training. "This is a serious gym for serious martial artists. Maybe you should try the yoga studio down the street." Sarah looked up briefly, meeting Marcus's gaze with calm, steady eyes. "I have permission to be here," she said simply, then returned to her routine. Marcus laughed, a sound that held no warmth. "Permission? From who?" "Mr. Kim." He shook his head. "Look, I don't want to see you get hurt. These heavy bags can be dangerous for beginners." "I appreciate your concern," Sarah replied, her voice remaining level. "But I can handle myself." Jake stepped forward, grinning. "Marcus here has been training for 15 years. He's won dozens of tournaments. He knows what he's talking about." Sarah stood up slowly, her movements controlled and deliberate. She was average height, maybe 5 feet 6 inches, with a lean but athletic build. Nothing about her appearance screamed danger or special training. That was exactly how she preferred it. "I'm sure he does," Sarah said diplomatically. "I'll just finish my workout and be out of your way." But Marcus wasn't ready to let it go. Something about Sarah's calm confidence irritated him. He was used to people being impressed by his credentials, maybe even a little intimidated. This woman seemed completely unfazed. "Tell you what," Marcus said, his voice taking on a challenging tone. "How about we have a little friendly sparring session? Nothing too serious. Just want to make sure you know what you're getting into, training in a place like this." Dennis chuckled. "Yeah, Marcus could teach you some basic moves. Consider it a free lesson." Sarah paused in her movements. She could see where this was heading, and every instinct told her to walk away. But there was something in Marcus's tone that suggested he wouldn't let this drop easily. She had encountered men like him before, those who couldn't accept that their assumptions might be wrong. "That's really not necessary," Sarah said, hoping to defuse the situation. "Come on," Marcus pressed. "What's the worst that could happen? I promise I'll go easy on you. We'll just do some light contact sparring. Think of it as a learning experience." Sarah looked at the 3 men facing her. Marcus stood with the confident posture of someone who had never been seriously challenged. Jake and Dennis flanked him like loyal supporters, already anticipating the entertainment value of watching their friend dominate a newcomer. What they didn't know was that Sarah Martinez had spent the last 8 years serving in the most elite military units in the world. She had completed Navy SEAL training when only a handful of women had ever attempted it. After that, she had been selected for Delta Force, where she had participated in classified operations across 3 continents. Her body was a weapon honed by the finest military instructors and tested in real combat situations where mistakes meant death. But Sarah had learned that revealing too much about herself often created more problems than it solved. People either didn't believe her, or they wanted to constantly test her abilities. She preferred to blend in, to be underestimated rather than feared. "I really don't think this is a good idea," Sarah said one last time. Marcus interpreted her reluctance as fear. "Look, I get it. You're nervous. But trust me, I've been doing this for years. I know how to control my techniques." You won't get hurt. The irony of his statement wasn't lost on Sarah. She glanced around the gym, noting the cameras in the corners and the solid mats covering the floor. If this was going to happen, at least the environment was relatively safe. Okay, Sarah said finally. But, just like contact, like you said. Marcus grinned triumphantly. Absolutely. Jake, Dennis, you guys can ref, and make sure everything stays friendly. As the three men began discussing rules and boundaries, Sarah quietly centered herself. She accessed the mental state she had learned to enter before every mission, calm, focused, and completely aware of every detail around her. Her breathing slowed, her senses sharpened, and years of training activated like a dormant computer coming online. Marcus began stretching ostentatiously, showing off his flexibility and form. We'll do 3-minute rounds, he announced. Light contact only. First person to score 3 clean hits wins. Sarah nodded, saying nothing. She removed her shoes and moved to the center of the mat. Marcus joined her, bouncing slightly on his feet in what he probably thought was an intimidating display of readiness. Don't worry, Marcus said with what he intended as a reassuring smile. It was meant to be an easy opening move, something to gauge her reaction time and defensive capabilities. Sarah wasn't there when his punch arrived. She had slipped to the side with minimal movement, just enough to let his fist pass harmlessly by. Marcus blinked in surprise. Her movement had been so smooth and efficient that he almost missed it entirely. Nice dodge, Marcus said, trying to maintain his confident demeanor. Let's see how you handle this. He threw a combination this time, a jab followed by a cross, both aimed at her torso with what he considered appropriate restraint. Again, Sarah seemed to simply melt away from his attacks, her movements flowing like water around stone. Marcus was beginning to feel the first stirrings of confusion. His techniques were solid, his timing was good, but he couldn't seem to land anything on this woman. It was like trying to punch shadows. Sarah remained patient, observing Marcus's patterns and tendencies. She could see the gaps in his training, good fundamentals, but predictable combinations and a tendency to telegraph his intentions. More importantly, she could see his growing frustration as his initial confidence began to crack. Come on, Marcus said, breathing slightly harder now. Stop running away and actually fight. That comment revealed more about Marcus's mindset than he probably intended. In his world, martial arts was about aggressive forward pressure and dominating opponents through superior technique and conditioning. He had never faced someone who could neutralize his attacks so effortlessly. Sarah decided it was time to shift gears slightly. The next time Marcus threw a punch, she didn't just evade, she redirected. Her hand moved in a small, precise arc that caught his wrist and guided his punch past her body while simultaneously throwing him off balance. Marcus stumbled slightly, his eyes widening with surprise. That redirection had felt like being caught in a gentle but irresistible current. What was that? Dennis called out from the sidelines. Some kind of Aikido maybe, Jake suggested, though he sounded uncertain. Marcus reset himself, his jaw tightening with determination. He was starting to realize that this wasn't going according to plan, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. Instead, he decided to increase the intensity. His next attack came faster and harder, a spinning heel kick aimed at Sarah's ribs. It was a flashy technique designed to overwhelm her with speed and power. In tournament competition, it would have been devastating. Sarah caught his leg mid-kick. Not redirected, not evaded, caught. Her hands moved like striking snakes, one securing his ankle while the other controlled his knee. Marcus found himself frozen in mid-technique, balanced precariously on one foot, while Sarah held his kicking leg as easily as someone might hold a fishing rod. For a moment, the gym was completely silent. Marcus's face went through a series of expressions, surprise, confusion, and dawning realization that he might be in serious trouble. Sarah could have ended the match right there. A dozen different takedowns and submissions were available from this position. Instead, she gently lowered his leg back to the ground and stepped back. Your balance recovery needs work, she said quietly, as if offering helpful advice. Marcus stared at her, his breathing now noticeably heavier. That technique had been executed with a level of skill and timing that spoke to training far beyond anything he had ever encountered. The way she had caught his kick wasn't lucky. It was precise, controlled, and devastatingly effective. "Who are you?" Marcus asked, his earlier cockiness completely gone. Sarah didn't answer directly. "Would you like to continue?" she asked instead. Marcus looked at Jake and Dennis, who were staring at the scene with obvious confusion. This wasn't how sparring sessions with beginners were supposed to go. Beginners didn't catch spinning kicks like they were catching butterflies. "Yeah," Marcus said, though his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "Let's continue." But now everything had changed. Marcus approached more cautiously, his movements tighter and more defensive. He was beginning to suspect that he had made a serious miscalculation, but his pride and reputation were on the line. Too many people knew him in this town for him to simply quit. Sarah could see the change in his approach and knew that the situation was about to escalate. Marcus was no longer treating this as a playful demonstration of his superiority. He was starting to fight like someone who was worried about losing. That made him more dangerous, but also more predictable. Desperation and ego combined to create patterns that Sarah had learned to exploit in far more serious situations than a small-town gym. The second round was about to begin, and Sarah realized that Marcus wasn't going to let this end quietly. She was going to have to make a choice about how much of her true capabilities to reveal. The cameras in the corners continued to record silently, and somewhere in the back of her mind, Sarah wondered if this little sparring session was about to become much more complicated than she had ever intended. Marcus circled Sarah more carefully now, his earlier swagger replaced by focused intensity. The casual sparring session had transformed into something much more serious. His reputation in Cedar Falls was built on his martial arts expertise, and losing to an unknown woman would be a humiliation he couldn't afford. "Time," Jake called out, and they began the second round. This time, Marcus didn't waste time with probing attacks. He came forward with a solid combination, a feint to the head followed by a powerful body shot. His technique was clean and well executed, the product of years of disciplined training. Sarah absorbed the impact on her forearms, the force barely registering. Her conditioning had been forged in environments where physical punishment was measured in survival, not points. Marcus's controlled strikes felt like gentle taps compared to what she had endured during her military training. But something in her defensive posture made Marcus pause. She hadn't flinched, hadn't given ground, and showed no sign of being affected by his attack. It was like punching a brick wall wrapped in cotton. "Is that all you've got?" Sarah asked quietly, her voice carrying no mockery, just genuine curiosity. The question hit Marcus like a slap. He had thrown solid techniques with real power behind them, and this woman was asking if that was his best effort. His face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. Marcus unleashed a flurry of attacks, punches, elbows, and knee strikes thrown with increasing aggression. He abandoned his earlier promise of light contact, putting real power behind each technique. His years of tournament competition had taught him dozens of combinations, and he used them all. Sarah moved through his attacks like she was dancing. Every punch missed by inches, every kick found empty air. But more than just evading, she began to demonstrate why her training was different from anything Marcus had ever encountered. As Marcus threw a hard right cross, Sarah didn't just slip the punch. She trapped his arm against her body and pivoted, using his own momentum to spin him around. Suddenly, Marcus found himself facing away from Sarah, his arm controlled, and his balance completely compromised. She could have broken his arm in 3 different ways from that position. Instead, she simply released him and stepped back. "Your combinations are good," Sarah said conversationally, "but you're telegraphing your intentions about 2 moves ahead." Marcus spun around, breathing hard now. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his uniform was beginning to stick to his skin. Sarah, meanwhile, looked like she had just finished a light warm-up. Dennis and Jake exchanged worried glances. They had watched Marcus dominate opponents in tournaments and demonstrations for years. They had never seen anyone make him look clumsy and predictable. "Who trained you?" Marcus demanded, his voice tight with frustration. "Various instructors," Sarah replied vaguely. "Would you like to continue, or should we call it here?" The offer to quit should have been welcome. Marcus was clearly outclassed, and Continuing would only lead to further embarrassment. But pride and masculine ego are powerful forces, especially when witnessed by friends and recorded by security cameras. "We're not done," Marcus snarled. He attacked again, this time with everything he had. Gone was any pretense of controlled sparring. Marcus threw strikes with tournament intensity, using techniques that had won him championships. His kicks snapped out with bone-breaking force. His punches carried knockout power. Sarah's response was a masterclass in combat efficiency. She caught his roundhouse kick with one hand and swept his supporting leg with her foot in the same motion. Marcus crashed to the mat with stunning suddenness. Before he could react, Sarah had dropped into a ground control position, her knee across his chest and her hand positioned at his throat. The position was called a combat mount in military close-quarters combat training. From here, Sarah could have delivered strikes to Marcus's head and neck that would have ended the fight permanently. Or she could have applied a blood choke that would have rendered him unconscious in seconds. Instead, she held the position just long enough for Marcus to understand how completely helpless he was, then stood up and backed away. "Point," Jake said weakly, though his voice suggested he wasn't sure about the rules anymore. Marcus lay on the mat for a moment, staring at the ceiling. The takedown had been so fast and smooth that his brain was still processing what had happened. One moment he had been throwing a kick that should have overwhelmed any normal opponent. The next moment he was on his back with Sarah controlling his entire body. He sat up slowly, his face pale. "That wasn't luck?" he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "No," Sarah agreed simply. "It wasn't." Marcus got to his feet, his movements careful and deliberate. His earlier confidence had been replaced by something resembling respect mixed with fear. He was beginning to understand that he wasn't just outclassed. He was outclassed by several orders of magnitude. "What branch?" Marcus asked quietly. Sarah tilted her head slightly, not understanding the question. "Military," Marcus clarified. "What branch of the military?" "Because there's no way you learn to fight like that anywhere else." For a moment, Sarah considered deflecting the question. But Marcus had been humbled enough to deserve some measure of honesty. "Navy," she said simply. Marcus nodded slowly. "Special Forces?" Sarah didn't answer, but her slight pause told Marcus everything he needed to know. "Jesus," Dennis whispered from the sidelines. "Are you serious?" Jake was staring at Sarah with new eyes. "Navy SEALs?" he asked in amazement. Sarah's expression remained neutral. "I'd prefer not to discuss my service record." But Marcus was putting pieces together now. The efficiency of her movements, the absolute calm under pressure, the way she had controlled and dominated him without apparent effort. These weren't the skills of a regular military member. These were the capabilities of someone trained in the most elite units in the world. "How long?" Marcus asked, his voice subdued. 8 years active duty, Sarah replied. Marcus let out a long breath. 8 years in Navy Special Forces meant Sarah had seen and done things that most people couldn't imagine. She had probably been in actual combat situations where the techniques she was demonstrating meant the difference between life and death. "I'm sorry," Marcus said suddenly, surprising everyone in the gym. "I made assumptions, and I was completely wrong. I thought I was dealing with some random woman who wandered into a serious gym. I didn't realize that I might know what I was doing." Sarah finished with the hint of a smile. Marcus nodded, looking embarrassed. "Yeah, exactly that. And I was a complete ass about it." The tension in the gym began to ease slightly. Marcus's apology was genuine, and his recognition of his mistake showed a level of maturity that his earlier behavior had hidden. "We all make assumptions," Sarah said diplomatically. "Usually they're harmless." "Usually," Marcus agreed. "But not when you challenge someone to a fight based on those assumptions." Dennis and Jake approached cautiously, their earlier swagger completely gone. "So when you caught his kick like that," Dennis began. "Basic redirection," Sarah said modestly, though they all knew there had been nothing basic about it. "And the takedown?" Jake asked. "Standard trip and transition." Again, Sarah's tone suggested these were elementary techniques, though the speed and precision of their execution had been anything but elementary. Marcus was shaking his head in amazement. "I've been training for 15 years, and you made me look like a white belt." "Different kinds of training," Sarah pointed out. "You train for competition and sport. I trained for She didn't finish the sentence, but they all understood. Marcus trained for tournaments with rules, referees, and safety equipment. Sarah had trained for situations where losing meant dying. Could you? Marcus hesitated, then continued. Would you be willing to train with us sometime? I mean, actually teach us some of those techniques. Sarah considered the request. Part of her wanted to decline, to maintain her anonymity and avoid the complications that came with revealing her background. But another part of her recognized something in Marcus's request, a genuine desire to learn rather than to dominate. Maybe, she said noncommittally. We'll see. Marcus nodded, understanding that he had no right to ask for anything more. He had challenged her as a joke, been thoroughly outclassed, and now she was gracious enough to even consider helping him improve. Just one more question, Marcus said. Earlier, when I was throwing everything I had at you, and you were just flowing around it all, how did you make it look so easy? Sarah thought about how to explain concepts that had taken her years to fully understand. In the military, we learned that the most efficient response to aggression isn't always more aggression, she said. Sometimes the best defense is to let your opponent defeat themselves. You were working very hard, using lots of energy and strength. I was just redirecting that energy back at you. Like Aikido? Dennis suggested. Similar principles, Sarah agreed. But adapted for situations where you can't afford to be philosophical about it. Marcus was nodding slowly, beginning to understand the fundamental difference between his martial arts background and Sarah's combat training. He had learned techniques for winning matches. She had learned techniques for survival. The takedown, though, Marcus said, touching his ribs where Sarah's knee had pressed against him. That was pure aggression. When redirection isn't enough, you end the threat quickly and decisively, Sarah explained. Half measures can be dangerous in real situations. The implications of her words hung in the air. Marcus was starting to understand that their sparring session had been conducted entirely on Sarah's terms. She had chosen to demonstrate her capabilities rather than simply dominate him. If she had wanted to hurt him, the fight would have ended in the first few seconds. I feel like I should be grateful, Marcus said with a rueful laugh. For what? That you were holding back. A lot. Sarah's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes suggested that Marcus's assessment was accurate. The point of sparring is to learn, she said. Not to hurt people. But they all knew that if this had been a real conflict situation, Marcus would have been in serious trouble. The woman standing in front of them possessed skills that had been honed in some of the most dangerous environments on Earth. Marcus looked around the gym, seeing it differently now. What had started as his domain, a place where he was the acknowledged expert, had become a classroom where he was clearly the student. Would you mind if I asked you something else? Marcus said. Sarah nodded. Why did you let me challenge you? I mean, you could have just walked away or told me about your background from the beginning. Why go through with it? Sarah considered the question carefully. Sometimes people need to learn things for themselves. If I had just told you I was military, would you have really understood what that meant? Marcus thought about it, then shook his head. Probably not. I would have still thought I could hold my own, just maybe been a little more careful about it. Exactly. Now you understand. The truth of her statement was undeniable. Marcus's encounter with real combat skills had been far more educational than any explanation could have been. Plus, Sarah added with a slight smile, it's been a while since I've had a chance to practice some of those techniques. Despite everything that had happened, Marcus found himself laughing. Glad I could help with your training. As the immediate tension dissolved, all four people in the gym were processing what had just occurred. For Marcus, Dennis, and Jake, it had been a revelation about the difference between martial arts as sport and combat as survival. For Sarah, it had been a reminder of how different her world was from the civilian experience. But the encounter wasn't over yet. What none of them realized was that the security cameras in the gym had recorded everything, and the footage was about to take on a life of its own. The next morning, Sarah woke up in her small apartment, hoping that the previous evening's encounter would fade into memory. She had moved to Cedar Falls specifically to avoid attention and live quietly after her military service. The last thing she wanted was to become known as the woman who had embarrassed the local martial arts instructor. But technology had different plans. Jake, still amazed by what he had witnessed, had asked Mr. Kim for the security footage. Initially, he just wanted to study Sarah's techniques for his own training. But when he watched the recording, He was struck by how incredible the entire sequence looked on camera. Sarah's movements appeared almost supernatural in their efficiency. The way she flowed around Marcus's attacks, caught his kick, and executed the takedown looked like something from an action movie. Without sound, and without the context of their conversation, it simply looked like a small woman completely dominating a much larger, highly trained martial artist. Jake uploaded a short clip to social media with the caption, "Local black belt gets schooled by mystery woman at Cedar Falls gym. Watch this incredible display of skill." Within hours, the video had dozens of shares. By the end of the day, it had thousands. The clip showed Sarah effortlessly evading Marcus's attacks, catching his kick with one hand, and taking him down with movements so smooth they seemed choreographed. Comments poured in from around the world. "That's some serious training right there. Is this real or staged? Those moves are incredible. Anyone know who she is? Those are definitely military techniques. That takedown was textbook special forces. This woman is the real deal." Sarah's phone started ringing Tuesday afternoon. The first call was from Marcus. "Sarah, I'm really sorry," he said immediately. "Jake posted a video from last night, and it's going viral. I had no idea he was planning to do that." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "What kind of video?" "Just the sparring part. You can't really hear the conversation, but your techniques, they look incredible on camera. People are trying to figure out who you are." "How viral?" Sarah asked, dreading the answer. "Last I checked, about 50,000 views and climbing fast. It's been picked up by several martial arts websites and military forums." Sarah closed her eyes. This was exactly what she had been trying to avoid. Viral videos led to media attention, which led to questions about her background, which led to complications she had left the military to escape. "I'll talk to Jake about taking it down," Marcus continued. "It's probably too late for that," Sarah said. "Once something spreads this far online, copies exist everywhere." She was right. By evening, the video had been downloaded and re-uploaded to dozens of different platforms. Military analysis channels were breaking down her techniques frame by frame. Martial arts forums were debating her possible background and training. The Cedar Falls Police Department called her Wednesday morning. "Ms. Martinez, this is Chief Roberts. I understand you're the woman in that video that's been circulating online." "Yes, sir," Sarah replied carefully. "Would you mind coming in for a brief chat? We've been getting calls all morning from news outlets asking about you. And frankly, we'd like to know who we have living in our community." Sarah agreed to the meeting, knowing that refusing would only create more suspicion. She arrived at the police station to find Chief Roberts waiting with Detective Sullivan, a woman about Sarah's age with intelligent eyes and a direct manner. "Please, have a seat," Chief Roberts said. "First off, we want you to know you're not in any trouble. We're just trying to understand the situation." "I appreciate that," Sarah said. "We've watched the video, and those are some impressive skills," Detective Sullivan said. "Our department consultant on defensive tactics says he's never seen anything quite like it outside of federal training programs." Sarah remained silent, letting them ask their questions. "We looked up your background," Chief Roberts continued. "Military service, honorable discharge, no criminal record. But the details of your service are largely classified." "Yes, sir." "Navy Special Warfare?" Detective Sullivan asked directly. Sarah hesitated, then nodded slightly. "SEALs," Chief Roberts pressed. "Among other things." The two officers exchanged glances. They were clearly impressed and also concerned about having someone with such an extensive classified background living in their small town without their knowledge. "Any ongoing security concerns we should be aware of?" Detective Sullivan asked. "The reason I ask is that this video has attracted some attention from people who might be interested in finding former Special Operations personnel." Sarah felt a chill. She hadn't considered that possibility. "What kind of attention?" "A few military blogs have identified you as likely former Delta Force," Chief Roberts said. "That level of exposure could potentially make you a target for various groups." The conversation was interrupted by Chief Roberts' phone buzzing. He looked at the screen and frowned. "Channel 7 News is here," he said. "They want to interview the mystery martial arts expert." We told them no comment, but they're persistent. Through the window, Sarah could see a news van parked outside the police station. A reporter was setting up a camera on the sidewalk. "Is there a back exit?" Sarah asked. "Of course," Detective Sullivan said. But this probably isn't going away. Videos like this have a tendency to take on lives of their own. As if to prove her point, Sullivan's phone rang. Detective Sullivan. Yes, we're aware of the situation. No, we cannot confirm the identity. I understand CNN is interested, but... She hung up and looked at Sarah with sympathy. National news. This story is getting bigger. Sarah felt trapped. Her careful plan to live quietly in a small town was unraveling rapidly. The skills she had hoped to leave behind were now broadcast across the internet, dissected by experts, and drawing attention from exactly the kind of people she had tried to avoid. What would you recommend? Sarah asked. Chief Roberts leaned back in his chair. Honestly, you have a few options. You can try to wait this out and hope it dies down, but that could take months. You can relocate again and hope nobody connects your new identity to this video. Or, Sarah prompted. You can control the narrative, Detective Sullivan suggested. Give one interview to a respectable outlet. Tell your story on your own terms. Sometimes transparency is the best way to end speculation. Sarah considered the options. Running again meant starting over completely, and there was no guarantee the video wouldn't follow her. Hiding indefinitely wasn't really living. But giving an interview meant exposing details about her life and service that she had kept private for good reasons. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Saw the video. Very impressive. We should talk. Colonel Harrison. Sarah recognized the name. Colonel Harrison had been her commanding officer during her final assignment. If he was reaching out, it meant the video had attracted official attention at the highest levels. I need to make some calls, Sarah told the officers. They escorted her out the back exit, and she drove home through streets that suddenly felt different. People at traffic lights were looking at her car, and she wondered if her face had been identified along with her abilities. Back in her apartment, Sarah called Colonel Harrison. Sarah, he said immediately. Impressive video. Also concerning. How concerning? Well, the good news is that your operational security held up. Nobody has connected your current identity to your classified service record yet. The bad news is that several foreign intelligence services are very interested in identifying the woman in that video. Sarah felt the familiar weight of her former life pressing back into her present. Recommendations? Disappear again if you want to stay hidden, or lean into it, and use the attention for something productive. There are several legitimate opportunities for someone with your skills and current public profile. What kind of opportunities? Training contracts, consulting work, maybe even teaching. All above board, all legal, and all a lot more lucrative than whatever you're doing now. Sarah looked around her small apartment, furnished with the few possessions she had allowed herself after leaving the military. She had been working part-time jobs and living simply, trying to adjust to civilian life. But perhaps that transition didn't have to mean hiding who she was. There's also a personal consideration, Colonel Harrison added. Your former teammates are proud as hell of that video. Word is getting around that one of our own just schooled some civilian black belt without breaking a sweat. Morale boost for the community. That perspective hadn't occurred to Sarah. She had been so focused on avoiding attention that she hadn't considered how her actions might be viewed by other veterans struggling with their own transitions to civilian life. Her doorbell rang. Sarah looked through the peephole and saw Marcus standing outside, looking nervous. Colonel, I need to go, Sarah said. But thank you for the call. Stay in touch, Sarah. And remember, you have friends in this community, wherever you decide to go from here. Sarah opened the door to find Marcus holding a gym bag and looking embarrassed. I brought you something, he said. And I wanted to apologize again. Inside the bag was a custom black belt with S. Martinez embroidered in gold thread. Mr. Kim and I talked about it, Marcus explained. Anyone with your skills deserves recognition. And, frankly, after watching that video about 100 times, I'm amazed you were as gentle with me as you were. Sarah examined the belt. It was beautifully made, clearly expensive, and represented a gesture of respect she hadn't expected. There's something else, Marcus continued. I've been getting calls all day from people who want to train with you. Martial artists, military veterans, even some law enforcement officers. People have seen the video, and they want to learn from someone with real experience. Sarah looked up from the belt. Calls. Mr. Kim gave me permission to offer you a teaching position at the gym. Full instructor status, design your own curriculum, set your own schedule. The interest is definitely there. For the first time since the video went viral, Sarah felt a spark of possibility rather than dread. Teaching would allow her to use her skills constructively while controlling the environment and the people she worked with. What would that involve, she asked. Whatever you want it to involve. Self-defense classes, advanced martial arts, tactical training for law enforcement. Your choice entirely. Sarah thought about Colonel Harrison's words about legitimate opportunities. She thought about the other veterans who might benefit from training with someone who understood their background. She thought about the alternative of running again or hiding indefinitely. Can I think about it? Sarah asked. Of course, Marcus said. But Sarah, that video shows something pretty amazing. You have skills that could help a lot of people, and the way you handled our sparring session showed real character. Maybe it's time to stop hiding those things. After Marcus left, Sarah sat in her apartment, holding the black belt and considering her options. The video had ended her anonymity, but it had also opened doors she hadn't expected. She could run again, or she could finally stop running. Her phone buzzed with another message, this one from Jake. Sorry about posting the video without asking, but my sister just signed up for whatever self-defense class you might teach. You inspired her to want to learn to protect herself. Just thought you should know. Sarah smiled, perhaps for the first time since this whole situation began. The video that had threatened to upend her quiet life might instead give her a chance to build something meaningful. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, seeing not just a former special operations soldier trying to hide from her past, but a woman with valuable skills and hard-won knowledge that could benefit others. The viral video had changed everything, but maybe that change was exactly what she needed. The next morning, Sarah called Mr. Kim and accepted the teaching position. 3 months later, her self-defense and tactical training classes had waiting lists. 6 months after that, she had opened her own academy. The woman who had wanted nothing more than to disappear had instead found a way to honor her service while building a new kind of life. And it all started with a black belt who challenged her as a joke, never imagining he was about to learn the difference between martial arts and military combat training. The video continued to circulate, inspiring countless people to seek out real training and preparation for personal protection. Sarah had learned that sometimes the things we try to run from are exactly the things the world needs us to embrace.